back to the. You know what? Do this interview with somebody else.
Well, we talked about this yesterday on the phone. This is exactly what we talked about.
Do the interview with somebody else. Really.
There's nothing that we didn't discuss on the phone, Donald.
Hi, I'm Charles Feldman, and welcome to another edition, but a very special one, of SOS America. If you've watched or listened to this podcast in the past, you know that we always have a guest to talk with about the issues facing America and the world. Today, there's no guest. You're stuck with me, basically, is what it is. It's just me. And there's a reason for it, because I am going to tell you a story that will take you behind the scenes, I think, of something that has been in the headlines in the US for the past week or so. It has been in the headlines all around the world. And as of the other night, when things kind of came to a crescendo, if you wish, inadvertently, I ended up getting involved in this story. I hope you're intrigued thus far, so let me tell you what it is. This has to do with Jimmy Kimmel and the suspension for a few days, almost a week, of his late night talk show here on the ABC TV network in the US. But because of what he said, and I'm not going to go through what he said again, it's all over the internet. If you're that curious, go ahead and you can watch it to your heart's content. But in any event, what he said, which I actually personally don't think was very at all offensive, got him suspended by ABC after pressure, and this is where it got really sticky, right? After pressure from the Trump White House. Trump and his appointed head of the Federal Communications Commission, that's the agency here in the US that licenses not TV networks, but individual TV and radio stations that comprise a network. Well, this particular gentleman, went on a rant about what Jimmy Kimmel said, and said in effect that the affiliated stations for ABC, the American Broadcasting Company, ought to do something about it. And if not, he threatened, then, the FCC might step in and do that. Well, that in this country is patently illegal. It is unconstitutional. The government cannot tell anybody what they can or cannot say, except, and I'm sure you guys, no matter where you are, have similar rules. You really can't yell fire in a crowded theater, causing panic when there is no fire. That's one of the few exceptions that always comes up. But anyway, so the show was taken off the air for several days, and there was great controversy about whether it would ever return. Well, just the other night, it did return. ABC was under a lot of pressure from people who were boycotting the network. ABC is owned by Disney, so there are people threatening to boycott, Disneyland and Disney World, and they weren't going to buy the little annoying products, that Disney sells ad nauseum to people who are willing to shell out hard-earned money for little statues of Mickey Mouse or whatever. So the show came back. So I started getting these text messages late at night here in LA from people I know on the East Coast asking if I'd seen the Jimmy Kimmel show that came back on the air. Because on the East Coast, it airs 3 hours earlier, I should point out, than it does here where I am in LA on the West Coast. Finally, someone was smart enough to take a shot of the opening monologue of the Jimmy Kimmel show off of their own TV set, and they sent it to me in a text message. And when I saw that clip, I then understood fully why people were texting me. Here is that clip.
What about also those who say that you're being, in recent months, awfully thin-skinned?
I've always been thin-skinned. I've been thin-skinned from day one.
Welcome back to Jimmy Kimmel Live. We are still on the air in most of the country, except...
Well, that clip, which had yours truly in it, was an interview that I did with Donald Trump back in the year 1990. For those of you too young to remember, that was before cell phones, before social media, but we did have electricity. We did have that. And it was an interview I did when I was at the time a correspondent with CNN in New York. Why did I do that interview? At the time, Donald Trump was certainly not involved in politics, but he was a well-known real estate developer in New York City. And he had ambitions to become a kind of casino mogul. He wanted to replicate what was happening in Las Vegas, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And so he had opened a casino of his own in New Jersey against many, many odds. Within a very short amount of time, articles started to be published raising questions about whether the casino was well capitalized enough to survive. Because casinos, yes, they take in a whole bunch of money, but they can also lose a lot of money, especially since labor costs in New Jersey, even in 1990, were much higher than they would have been in Las Vegas, Nevada. So following up on this, a couple of producers and I from CNN went on almost a 6-month investigation into whether or not Donald Trump's casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey, was capitalized enough to survive. I attended hearings. I spoke with countless people, as did my producers in the Trump organization. And I should also add that I knew Trump even before this, because I used to do a lot of business news reporting for CNN. And being in Manhattan, there was often a time when we wanted somebody who had, some fair degree of knowledge about the business world. We'd want somebody to comment on it. And so often I would pick up the phone and I would call Donald Trump in Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan. And I'd ask if I could come over with the camera crew and sit down and discuss whatever the economic story of the day happened to be. And he was always very accommodating. He was always easy to deal with. He was always, to be very honest, a very charming guy. He had some funny stories. Some of them were probably, even for the time, and certainly now, off color, but he was fine to deal with. But then, as I said, came this almost half-year investigation into the casino. And it became clear to us that the stories that were published were accurate. The casino didn't have enough money to be successful in the long term. So now it was time, having interviewed many other people off camera and a few on camera, it was time to sit down with Donald Trump himself and confront him with what we had discovered and get his responses to it so we could put this on the network, on CNN. So I called him up the day before we were scheduled to do the interview as a courtesy. And I don't remember the exact words at the time, because this is now going back, 35 years. But in effect, I said, look, we cannot by policy give you the questions in advance. We're not going to. But it's a weighty topic. We understand that there are a lot of intricacies, a lot of nuances to this kind of a story. So here are kind of the general areas, which is not an uncommon thing to do for complex stories. Here are some of the general areas that we intend to go into, so that you can, do your homework and check out things to whatever degree you wish to check them out, so that you're not blindsided. It wasn't designed to be a kind of gotcha kind of interview. It was designed to get honest answers to what we thought were very honest questions. The next day, I show up at the place that Trump had designated would be the interview area. And I'm there with my producer and the camera crew. Trump is there with somebody from his organization. I forgot who now. And we sit down to do the interview, which is where that clip that you just saw and that was used on Jimmy Kimmel's show the other night. That was a small clip of the much larger interview, which, by the way, you can still find with not a lot of effort. One way to do it is if you Google my last name, CNN and Trump, Feldman, CNN, Trump, doesn't matter the order. Very often you will come across that particular clip. It lives in many places, for better or worse, on the internet. So anyway, we sit down with Trump, and I start going through what we had come across by interviewing people in his organization and others. And Trump, in a weird way, because he was already sort of giving this weird vibe off, starts coming across like he's totally shocked about what we're talking to him about. Like this was, he accused us of, we interviewed people in his organization. He knew that. We were investigating his casino. He knew that. We were looking into the capitalization of his casino. He knew all that. He knew all that. He didn't know the specific questions, but he kind of got the idea, because he's not a stupid man. At least he certainly wasn't in 1990. So to this day, I will contend that he then went into an act. What kind of act? The act was to take great umbrage to what we were doing, to attack myself and my producers and CNN as an organization back in 1990, remember, for taking low blows, in effect, for being dishonest. I think at one point in the full interview, he actually accuses me of being I believe his phrase was dishonest reporter. And I was totally taken aback because, again, I knew that he knew from the night before the general area that we were going to be talking about, and that what he was doing was putting on an act for the TV cameras. I was convinced of it then, and 35 years later, I am convinced of it now. And so, as we go along and he starts berating me and my organization at the time, we come to a point which was not in the clip on the Jimmy Kimmel show, but you can see again if you go and watch the entire clip in its entirety. It runs a few minutes. We get to a point where Trump takes the mic that he had wearing on his jacket, I believe it was, lapel, and he takes it off and he dangles it in the air in front of me, wanting me clearly to take it from him. But I wasn't at the time going to give him that courtesy. So there's this awkward moment where I'm looking at him and he's looking at me and he keeps talking and I'm kind of like looking at him and he's holding and dangling the microphone. And then finally he just drops it with a slight, thud on the table.
Of things, and
Here we are.
Well, we've got to talk
Back to
about that.
back to the negative.
Back to the negative.
Back to the. You know what? Do this interview with somebody else.
Well, we talked about this yesterday on the phone. This is exactly what we talked
Do
about.
the interview with somebody else. Really. You don't need this. Do it with somebody else and have a good time with it. Because frankly, you're a very negative guy, and I think it's very unfair reporting. Good luck.
I disagree with you. Sorry you feel that way.
Okay, I'll see you.
There's nothing that we didn't discuss on the phone, Donald.
And at that point, he gets up, breaks the interview, shakes my hand while telling me, what a, scumbag I am. Not his words, but basically what he was saying. And then leaves the room where we were conducting the interview. And if you watch or listen to the full interview that aired at the time, you will hear me at the very end as Donald Trump is exiting the room. You will hear me say, "But Donald, we talked about this last night," I think I said, "on the phone," because I wanted it on the record that what he was doing was an act, that he was fully aware of what we were doing. He was fully aware of the subject matter. He was fully aware at the time of the general direction that the line of questioning was going to go in. And it was purely for camera. He wanted to show that he was being, in effect, that it was a gotcha interview, that we kind of came at him and took him by surprise, and it was unfair. And that ended that, we thought. But true to form, Donald Trump in 1990 then went about over the next 24 hours trying to get my producers and myself fired from CNN, and the piece that we were putting together, basically tossed, so it would not see the light of day. He contacted the then president of CNN, who called me and inquired about, what went on with the interview with Trump, and I explained. Trump even went so far at the time to get in contact with Ted Turner. Now, Ted Turner in 1990 was very much still involved. He, of course, was the founder of CNN, and he was in 1990 very much a hands-on CEO, owner, whatever you wanted to call him. I mean, he was essentially CNN in those days. And it reached all the way to Ted. And to Ted's credit, I don't know exactly what he told Trump in whatever form of communication they had, whether it was a phone call or it might have been an email in 1990, but more likely probably a phone call. But in any event, whatever communication they had, Ted was not buying it, and we ended up airing the piece that we wanted to air, and included in it the segment where Donald Trump, takes off his microphone, dangles it dramatically in front of me, and then drops it on the table and gets up and walks out of the interview. Now, only days later, someone tells me, hey, you're mentioned in the current issue, it was a weekly, I think at the time, of Vanity Fair magazine, which was then, it still is, a very well-read magazine, but much more in 1990 because, well, more people read magazines than they do nowadays. And sure enough, I pick up Vanity Fair and I'm thumbing through it and I find the page that I was directed to. And in that, Trump was continuing his sort of tirade against me. And there was a quote to the effect that I had been rude to his staff, which I never had been. And I had made, I think he said it in the quote, I had made his secretary or his personal assistant cry or some stuff like that. Well, anyone who knew, as I did at the time, the person he was talking about would know that an airliner falling on her head would not have made her cry. She had a backbone of pure titanium and a gut of steel. Nothing would have moved this person to emotion, and certainly nothing that I could have actually said while interviewing people for the purposes of the piece. But that was part of the strategy to clearly discredit both me, my producers, and CNN at the time. So since that time, I've had two occasions over the years to actually have a brief discussion with Trump, way before he got into the White House. But that clip that we showed you that was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, in effect, kind of disappeared for a long time. Remember, this was done in 1990. By the next year, everybody had moved on until Donald Trump ran for president the first time around. And very similar to what happened, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, very similar to when I got a series of text messages the other night saying, "Hey, did you see the Kimmel show?" I got a call from somebody from the New York Times wanting to know if I had seen my interview with Donald Trump, because I guess they wanted some kind of a comment on it. And I remember saying, "What interview with Donald Trump?" Because I really had not forgotten about it, but it was so many years before, it just wasn't on my mind. And then the person on the other end said, "Well, have you gone online and seen the CNN front business page?" And I hadn't. Of course, it was early in the morning here. So I quickly got up, went to my laptop, and Googled CNN. Actually, I probably didn't Google them. It was probably saved, bookmarked on my computer. But I went to CNN.com and their business section, and lo and behold, there was the interview. The interview from 1990 with me and Donald Trump. And I was reading the copy at the time, and I guess what they were trying to say was that he hadn't changed, that he was, and he said it himself in that clip from 1990, he was thin-skinned from day one, which I guess he means at birth, although I'm not quite sure who measured the thickness of his skin when he was born, but from day one, I think he says he was thin-skinned. And I think what they were trying to say was that all these years, decades later, that he had not grown. He had not changed in any material way. He got older, sure, more wrinkled, absolutely, fatter, no doubt, but his temperament, his belief system, his attitude toward the news media, his attitude, in effect, toward free speech had not changed from the time I sat down with him back in 1990 to the time that he first ran for president of the United States. And in lieu of what has happened in just the past couple of weeks with his lawsuits against TV networks, the New York Times, which was thrown out, by the way, and the pressure from the White House to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air, I think demonstrates that even in 2025, Donald Trump has not changed one bit. Thank you for taking the time to be with me on this particular journey, a kind of behind the scenes look at a clip that you may have seen or heard in just the past few days. That is just one of the stories behind it. Thank you for being with us on SOS America. Join us for the next episode when we'll go back to our normal format of having a guest that I will interview. Any comments, you are welcome to make them. And by all means, of course, do subscribe. It is perfectly free. So until the next time, I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you.